This is my job. I come here every day and do this, and I'm still astounded daily at just how complicated things really are. The view that you might have when you look at something initially is probably wrong. It's not giving the complexity of people's real life situations the attention or the merit that it deserves, right? You might see somebody and be like, why don't they go to a shelter, right? And then if you dig a little bit deeper, it's because, maybe there's not a shelter that's available, or maybe that person has an animal with them that they love and they can't take that animal into shelter with them. So you're asking them to choose between being sheltered and being with their companion. Anytime you find yourself thinking an easy answer to a question, to pause and be like, I bet it's more complicated than I'm giving it credit for. What is it that would make somebody not accept shelter if it were offered to them? And then how does that then point you towards actions that we could be doing as a society, as an institution, as a city, as a government, whatever it is? What could we be doing differently to make options that are more reflective of what people are actually facing and the complexities of their life and the nuances of their needs, so that we can collectively do what it is that we want to do, which is care for each other better, right? I want to believe that. I really do.
I'm Rex Holbein, and welcome to You Know Me Now, a podcast conversation that strives to amplify the unheard voices in our community, as well as the individuals and organizations that are in service to those in need. In these episodes, I want to remind all of our listeners that the folks who share here do so with a great deal of courage and vulnerability. They share a common hope that by giving all of us this window into their world, they're opening an increased level of awareness, understanding, and perhaps most importantly, a connection within our own community. In every city and town across America, our libraries are loved. I know I smile to myself every time I come through the entry doors of the main branch in downtown Seattle, or for that matter, any one of the other neighborhood branches. I think it's connected to knowing ahead of time that I'm entering into a special place, similar to walking into a church or a museum. Common to these spaces is that there are rules of conduct, ones that ask us to be respectful of others. I'm guessing a good many of our listeners, at one time or another when growing up and visiting the library, were told they were being too loud, that they were disturbing others. By the time we're adults, we know most of these rules of conduct without being told. For people experiencing homelessness, libraries have always been sanctuaries. They provide shelter from inclement weather, access to water, and use of a bathroom. More recently, they offer use of the internet and a place to charge devices. For many, and maybe most importantly, they are a safe place to be, a place where they are welcome. As the number of people struggling on our streets increases, there is also an increased strain on our library system. We wanted to know how the Seattle Public Library was navigating the complexities of this issue. I think you're going to be surprised by what we found out.
My name's Laura Harrington, and I am the Senior Community Resource Specialist for Seattle Public Library, which is a mouthful of a job title, but essentially I'm a social worker by training, and my work here at the library is to act as a resource navigator for folks who need resources largely that exist outside of the library, so to connect people to resources beyond what the library does, but that impact their ability to be in our spaces and take full advantage of what the library has to offer.
Wow, that's beautiful. I mean, really, I didn't know that the library actually had such a person.
Yeah.
Do you work alone in that capacity, or do you have a team?
I have a team, so I'm actually the latest hire to our social services or community resources team. It started after the COVID pandemic and started with the hire of a social services librarian. So our social services librarian is a librarian by training, and her area of expertise is social services. So just like you might go to a genealogy librarian for help with ancestry, you can go to her for help with sort of what social services exist, how do you access them. She was the original kind of team member here, and then we have another community resource specialist who has a focus on young adults and helping folks who are largely under the age of 26 access resources and do sort of the same work that I do. And then my role is some direct service, working directly with patrons, doing that resource navigation, and then some sort of administration, thinking about how does the library respond and offer social services more at like a policy or program management level.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this, but the first person that was hired, when was that?
She's been here a little over 2 years now, okay. So it was kind of right on the heels of the library reopening post-COVID.
I see. And before that time, did the Seattle Public Library have any type of social outreach?
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, for several years, we had a contract with DESC, Downtown Emergency Services Center, and they had a case manager who would come in and essentially provide DESC services from the library. And so that was SPL's first kind of foray into social services in the library, and was, by all counts, very successful until COVID came and all of our buildings shut down, and that, prevented us from being able to do that model of work. So during that kind of period of soul searching, SPL decided to, rather than restart that contract or bring in an outside entity, to think about how could a social services team be brought in-house, be city employees, SPL employees, and then do not only that work of directly serving patrons, but also how do we build partnerships in the social services arena, and then how do we also help better support staff's training and development around these things.
You're really, by bringing it in-house, you're creating a culture.
Right.
As opposed to something external that's bumping around with you.
Yep, you can come and see this person on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Instead, it's like, we realize this is a huge need and that a social worker in the Central Library downtown, or even a social worker in all the libraries across the city, all 26, 27 locations, isn't going to be enough. We really need all staff to have a little more training, and staff at SPL are doing amazing work with folks in crisis, folks using substances, folks in mental health crisis all the time, but they're doing it without any kind of like formalized training or a singular institutional approach, right? So what you get in one branch might be really different because of what those staff have been able to do, have experience doing.
So that's part of what you're developing.
Exactly.
Is a SPL-wide kind of approach to the issue of needs that the community might have.
Correct.
You guys were founded in 1890, which I just recently figured out. I mean, that's a long time, right? From 1890 to about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, where the library started to actually operate in this manner.
Yep.
How do you think the library handled people in need before that? Because certainly the libraries are a hub, not just of learning, but of, a safe harbor in a sense. A place
for people to be,
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a tension or like a challenge that libraries have struggled with since the beginning of libraries is like, who are we for and what is the kind of proper use of the library? And it's such a beautifully democratic institution of like, we are for everyone, right? And that's kind of our founding value. But operationalizing that is challenging, right? Because how do you respond in situations where one person's need or desired use is in conflict with someone else's? Whether that is, whether I might say that that's right or not, that happens. That's the tension of a public space, and so
and who gets to say if it is in conflict?
Correct, right? Yeah, and how do we, as the stewards of this space and the stewards of these resources, how are we influenced by the loudest voices in the rooms or whatever that might be, right? And so I think that has always been something that our leadership, that our staff have been aware of. And it's also something that, we have to wade into. We can't afford to not have an approach to everything that comes through our doors. So I think that the decision to really lean in more explicitly on social work or recognizing the overlap between public librarianship and social work was just that, like a recognition of something that was already happening and a desire to say, we need to be doing...
Be more intentional.
Maybe not doing more, but doing something with more forethought or doing things that we really know are the most, evidence-based responses to these needs or the most I don't know,
Yeah.
morally or ethically in line with what we want to be doing as an institution.
Yeah, I mean, if you're being intentional, then suddenly you're being aware of what's also not working and what's working, and
Right.
you can repeat.
We can iterate, we can
processes.
think, oh, that didn't work well, what can we
Yeah.
do differently?
You have a
And
place for that to happen.
exactly,
Versus if DESC was doing it, they were taking it back to DESC and saying, hey, we
Yeah.
ran into this, but maybe SPL wasn't moving forward.
Sure, yeah,
that.
and how, yeah, and I think the shift from contract social work to in-house social work is such a great example of like, let's pause and think about what are not just necessarily like what did we do wrong or what wasn't working, but
What's
what
the
do we
next
need
step?
now, right? And what do we need
Yeah.
for an institution truly of this size, and where we have, I mean, our branches are all across the city. Like the needs of Queen Anne are really different than the needs even of Magnolia, which is, pretty close. And then the needs of Lake City versus South Park
They're
are
all
hugely
unique.
different, right? And so having us as a team, I think if we can do our work well, which we're still a new team, so we're striving for this, but if we can do our work well, we can really help branch staff who are the experts in their community, who are most tapped into their like local neighborhoods. We can really help them figure out what does social services look like, or what does being able to provide information and referral and connections to resources in this neighborhood look like for these people, for this population, and to really allow them to run with that, right?
Yeah.
And have it not be one size fits all across the city.
Yeah. Create a structure that informs but doesn't necessarily dictate
Exactly.
how you move forward.
Yes, that's so
each
well
branch
said.
can move forward on their own.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did that come about? Like, was it upper management that just said, hey, or did it come from below?
Yeah.
How does that actually take place? Because that's a big step, I would say,
is.
right? I mean, to
Yeah.
basically say we're going to bring social workers in-house at the Seattle Public Library.
Yeah. I know that there are a few people who have been real champions of this work. So, for example, Valerie Wonder, she's our regional manager for the downtown region. So she oversees this building, which is the only library location in our region. But she's been at SPL for a really long time, first in sort of like community outreach, which is a separate unit, our community engagement team. And then sort of rising into branch leadership. And she's been a real advocate for working with DESC. I think she was integral in creating that contract, and then thinking about, okay, let's do that revisiting. So I think it's both sort of definitely, it's definitely an ask that has come from staff, I know, consistently about like, we need more support. What can we do? We need more.
This happened and I want to know how should I respond?
Yeah, exactly. So I know that is that staff are huge advocates for for patrons and getting help for patrons who need it in various ways. But then I do think our leadership has been really responsive and definitely aware of that need as well.
Good job, Seattle Public Library.
Yeah,
I mean,
I feel really
I'm impressed,
lucky. Yeah,
quite frankly.
It's interesting because we have a group of social workers in libraries across the country that come together, and like we have a little call every 2 weeks where we just troubleshoot and think like, oh, I'm struggling with this, or what have you guys done for this, that, or the other.
That's tremendous.
It's great, and it's been such a lifeline as I start because I'm new to libraries, and so just learning the landscape of this industry has been really challenging. And then to be sort of libraries, but sort of also separate, it has been hard. So this group has been really helpful. But the way that social work gets practiced at libraries across the country is so different. And I do feel like there is something that I really just love and respect about SPL's approach to really focus on like, how do we culturally change what it is that we're doing and recognize that as an institution, not just as like, you're the social worker, you can work with all the folks who are living outside, but instead to say, this is something we want to do as an institution.
Well, the beautiful thing about what you're talking about in creating a culture is that then you're in a position to help change the culture in Seattle.
Yeah.
You can go from Seattle Public Library, this is our view, this is how we interact, this is how we create dignity and the ability to see each person in the library system. That becomes infectious, I think, in how Seattle citizens can see each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that I think one of the things that's really powerful about libraries as a site for this is libraries, again, are for everyone. And so it is one of these places that are unique in our city, and I think unique in our culture, where, we are as valued by someone who, is really wealthy and comes here for books and educational content, or, whatever it might be, and as valued by someone who's living outside and is coming here maybe to charge their phone or to participate in a program or whatever it might be.
Or look up some services.
Yeah, and so the opportunity for those two hemispheres to meet and mix and see the humanity in each other, right? And then what can happen from those moments of authentic, here we are sharing this thing that we both love and value, or, bumping into each other. I do think it's special and unique in our current social settings.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. That's beautiful. So before we dive into some of the programs, some of the ways that you go about your work, who is the Seattle Public Library? What is your mission? I know you're a place of learning and opportunity for citizens, but is there a elevator pitch that you have?
Yes, and I should be better about what is our technical mission? Yeah, what do we do here? So the library, I know, one of the things that I love about our mission statement is that our goal is to connect people to information in a democratic way. So we're not here to judge what it is that you want to learn about or what it is that you want to do. We're here to facilitate those connections, right? So if you want to read books about magic, great. We want to be able to help you do that. If you need help researching, something else entirely, we want to be able to do that. And so we really want to be responsive to and reflective of that community, that we are stewards of this amazing resource for the entirety of the Seattle population, and so we don't discriminate on what it is that you want to learn about or access,
what the topic is.
It's not our business, right? We're we just want you to be able to connect to this resource and to be able to take full advantage of that.
What I hear in all that is, and tell me if this is correct, but it's not just democratic access to knowledge and information. It feels like community building too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we think of the library as a community hub, right? I mean, we're one place that you can go in your community to connect with each other, to connect to that information, but also to just find joy and light and, curiosity, and to really lean into that. Yeah. And I love that about the library. And that's also what we want for folks who, you think of as sort of my demographic, or who I'm here to work with, folks who are living outside or who might be in mental health crisis. We also want them to be able to engage in the things that bring them joy, right? So that it's not just about let's meet your basic needs, let's get you, connected to tax help or whatever it is that people need, but also to say, what are you curious about?
Here.
What do you love? What do you want to learn about or engage with? Do you want to do a craft project? Do you want to, whatever it might be.
That's beautiful. So that's a good segue into, we are one community, but also we're broken into, different groups within that community. Sure. And one of the big groups that we talk a lot about with homelessness is, the us and them, the housed and the unhoused, and of course, those two groups are meeting and mixing at the library. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that difficult for folks that are in the housed community suddenly having to interact? Maybe the only time ever they interact with someone that's homeless when they're at the library, and vice versa too.
Yeah.
Right? Both are going to be experiencing a different type of vibe from each other.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is, again, that tension of being a public place, that we are sort of a microcosm of everything that's happening in our city. And so I do think that there is something special about creating moments where those two populations can mix and meet and hopefully focus on the overlap in the Venn diagram, right? Our shared humanity, our shared love of whatever program we're attending. But of course it is intention as well. And again, it goes back to what's my idea of my entitlement to this shared space? And then how do I balance that as a patron with someone else's need to use the space for something very different that I might not agree with? I think one of
that also might be interrupting my personal space
exactly.
in a sense. Not necessarily even physically that close, but smells, sounds,
sure.
erratic behavior, whatever is unfolding.
Yeah, and then
how do you create that bandwidth for every person
Right.
to navigate that.
Yeah, and it's a point that we, staff are always acting. I think of them a little bit as like party hosts, right? Where you're like, I'm curating a space, I'm curating a shared space and trying to mediate any of those disputes that come up. And so that is a role of staff, right? To try to think about what is the dominant use for this space and how do we help everyone act in accordance with that? Again, not so that we're policing space or, policing people's behavior necessarily, but really thinking about how do we create
Facilitate.
how do we create a space where the most number of us can enjoy it and enjoy being together, but also being separate and alone or, having my workspace or whatever it might be. But it is challenging, and I think that it is in that challenge, I try to look at it as like in that challenge, there's a moment of opportunity for us to to be educating people about like, oh, when you see someone in crisis in the library, maybe that's a moment where we can talk to you about, well, here's how we're going to respond, or here's how my colleague might respond. Maybe I can talk to you a little bit about, the reasons why that person might be in crisis, not the particular like private reasons of that individual patron, but to say, oh yeah, it's somebody who was having an outburst in the library today, and because it's really cold and wet outside, and maybe their tent got rained on, or they're soaking wet, and so giving them a little bit of grace, but using those moments to try to connect, educate, and then again think about. How do we mitigate the impact on you, but also how do we mitigate the impact of you on someone else as well?
You know what I really love that what you just did is that, like, when I asked that question, I expected, I expected your answer was going to be that you were somehow in a de-escalation manner, in a sensitive way, you were going to go to the person that was causing the issue.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to work beautifully with this, but you actually did the opposite. You went to the person that was being impacted and said first, hey, we're going to go talk to this person, but we also want to let you know this is what's happening, and maybe help try to create more bandwidth and more understanding. That's beautiful.
It's both, right? Like we do have to do both. And again, that's our job. That's the job of being here for everyone, right? Is that I need to be here to hear your frustrations with like, I just wanted to come here and like have a quiet moment, and somebody is having their, outburst over there, and that bothers me, and I need to be here for that person, right? But I also need to be here for that other person to say, they're having a tough day, and what can we do to like turn down the volume?
Well, you're modeling the kind of behavior we want in society.
Right? I hope so.
But let's dig a little further into that. Like in those moments, let's say someone is having erratic behavior, or maybe we can even actually go into, I know the library has rules of conduct.
Yep.
Right? And I was actually, when I looked through your website, I was impressed how there are levels of rules, from moving furniture in the simplest type thing, and a list of other things.
Yep.
But as you move down that list, are you all trained or educated how to address those violations and what the correct response would be?
Yeah, we are. So rules of conduct are our way of, again, like keeping the space, trying to, as equitably as we can, think about what does it mean to be a participant in this space, and how do we then monitor that behavior, correct that behavior for the good of everyone. It's difficult because those rules of conduct, many of them, not just at SPL, but historically, if you look through them, some of the examples of what is prohibited in the library is pretty targeted towards certain populations. So for instance, there's rules of conduct across the country that limit the size of belongings that you can bring with you into a library. This is my opinion, but I don't think that prohibition on like large things is against me going to kill a few hours of time at the library on my way to the airport. My flight gets delayed and I'm hanging out at the library with my big suitcase. That's probably not what that rule of conduct was originally created to prohibit. It was preventing people from bringing in a shopping cart of their belongings, right? Which again speaks to a need in our community for people to store their belongings safely if they don't have a home.
Exactly.
And so some of those things are contentious because we don't necessarily police them in the same way. We don't say, sorry, person going to the airport, you've got to find somewhere else to hang out with your luggage. But we may be more quick to have that conversation with a homeless person in their shopping cart, right? So rules of conduct are tricky, and especially like as someone coming from that social work, social justice perspective, who's new to libraries, the rules of conduct have been an area where I'm like, whoa, how do we balance like who we want to be with like when the rubber hits the road, and we have to figure out a way to manage this public space well for all these competing priorities, you know? So I don't know, they're difficult.
And is that part of the cultural change that the library is going through now through its own education?
Yes, right. And one of the big initiatives that's been happening for years now is a revision of the rules of conduct into more of a community use agreement model. So now we're shifting, hopefully in 2025 they will come online, more towards these are your rights and responsibilities as a participant of the library, and less away from you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, and you can't do this, you know, in this certain way. But really to think about, again, like we are communally building this place and this space, and we want to be in partnership with our patrons and thinking about how do you do that in a way that's going to allow you to enjoy the space, but also allow everybody else to enjoy it as well.
Yeah. I imagine that one is, that's beautiful, giving responsibility and ownership, you know, to the individual. I also can see if the broader community hasn't come up along with SPL in this cultural shift, right? If it's only happening at within the, you know, the staff at SPL, then you could see a greater number of people coming to the library that are in need of basic needs, not just needs of knowledge.
Yeah.
And start to use the library as a shelter, and you could see people who are housed making the decision not to come.
Yeah.
Do you worry about that?
I don't worry about it. I think it's something for us to be aware of, and I think that it is a huge part of my job, just the like thinking about what is our lane as the library. You know, to be frank, like we're not trained to be a social service organization. We're not. That's not what we're aiming to be. We want to have this as an aspect of what we can do, and we want to be able to do it well and do it consistently and do it with like training. But we also need to know where's the limit of our expertise, and how do we then not just say, ooh, that's beyond what I can do, or I'm uncomfortable with that, but to say, how do I transition you to the correct organization or entity that can really care for you in the way that you need care, connection, resources, whatever it is. I do think we're conscious of sort of riding that line, so that we're not ever getting to the point where we're like, oh, and we've totally transitioned into a day center for, you know, homeless adults or whatever it may be. I think that there's always more that we can be doing, and there's more that we can be encouraging partners to do, or ways that we can work with other organizations to maybe do some of their work in ways that better meet our patrons' needs, or that alleviate some of the friction that our patrons experience when trying to access those resources. So there's work that we can do, but I do think that there's a pretty sharp, clear boundary of like, we're a library at the end of the day, and there's only so much that we can do. And how do we do what we can do really, really well and really thoughtfully? And then how do we not do what we can't do equally thoughtfully as well, if that makes sense.
And clear, yeah, it does. That's a good answer. I mean, to clearly define where the boundary is, right, also helps, you know, nip in the bud any false expectations of what this can be.
That's actually something we deal with all the time, and why our job titles are community resource specialist, not social worker, because we really don't want people to be like, you're my case manager, like you're going to get me into housing, where I'm like, I would love it if I had a supply of housing that I could, you know, help people get into. But, you know, I want to be really clear with people. And so a lot of our conversations when we are working directly with patrons is to say, okay, here's what my job is, here's what my job isn't, and here's what I will do to make sure that where my expertise or my resources or ability ends, I can get you to that next step, right? But it is hard because people who are in crisis or who are in like a significant moment of imminent need are not like, oh, I understand the technical differences between case management and, you know, social work as an approach, you know. And so we have to be really, you know, careful and thoughtful about people.
And clear.
Yeah.
You know, to help people that are housed understand why are people that are unhoused coming to the library? Can you talk a little bit about that? What are the services? What are the benefits of someone that is finding themselves living on the street? What do they find at the library?
Yeah. We asked this recently. We just dipped our toe into a community listening process, which we're hoping to really expand as a team in 2025 to hear most directly from folks that we're hoping to, serve. And we asked, what brings you to the library? Why do you come here? What is it that we are already doing that you like, and what could we be doing better? People come for all different kinds of reasons. People come because it's a free place to spend time during the day. There are very few places where you can hang out all day with no one bothering you, no one asking you to buy another cup of coffee, nobody asking you to spend money for other reasons. So I think just
access to bathrooms,
access to running water, drinking fountains, things like that. I think it just to have a place where you can be is really, really important. And inherent in that is also shelter from the elements, right? So when it is really hot in Seattle, those 10 days that tend to happen every year, a lot of our branches are air conditioned. So it's a cool place to be. In the winter, it's a dry place to be. It's a warm place to be. And it's a place where ideally, if we're doing our job well, you are welcomed, right? Not just where you're tolerated, but you are welcome to be here. And we are here to help you connect to other things if you want that. And if not, that's cool too. You can just hang out and charge your phone, People come for the computer access. We know it's darn near impossible to do anything these days if you're not connected to the internet. And so for folks who maybe don't have cell phones or don't have reliable internet access or cell access, they can come here, use our public computers. We have a courtesy phone on the first floor, and so you can make local calls if you need to, if you don't have a cell phone. You can print things. So just a ton of different things.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if somebody does have specific needs, like whether it's mental health, drug rehab, job, housing, any of that, do you have someone that can sit down and talk to them about what direction they can be pointed into?
Yep, so that's our role here, myself and then the other community resource specialist at Central. We are at the Central Library, and so one of the dreams for the future is figuring out a way that we could be more present in branches across all these regions. Currently, that work kind of falls to our colleagues, who, again, have been doing it very well and doing it for a long time. But one of our goals is that we can act as a resource filtration system in a way, so that when our colleagues are trying to connect somebody to detox, they don't have to start by Googling detox now Seattle and trying to wade through all of these resources that are out there, competing bits of information, calling a bunch of phone numbers, not getting through. But instead we can say, here's your first step, and ideally here's somebody that you can call that we know that we have an established relationship with, who's familiar with what the setting of the library is and can really help. So
that's a tall order.
It is. Oh my gosh.
Because those services are forever coming and going.
Yes.
They get funded, they don't get funded.
Absolutely.
And that's a source of frustration, because I know many people that are homeless get handed phone numbers and people to talk to, and then they call and, sorry, that number's been disconnected.
Absolutely. Yes. It's frustrating. And of course you can understand why experiences like that would lead somebody to stop asking for or accepting help, right? Because why would you want to keep chasing something that implicitly, by its lack of availability, it's being told to you that it is not a priority that you get that thing, right? And so I totally understand that. And that's, again, why one of our goals as a team is not to be I'm going to give you the printout from 211 about all the drug detoxes that exist, allegedly. But instead, I'm going to sit with you and I'm going to say, okay, what are your unique characteristics or criteria? What are your identities? How do I match you to something that's really going to be a good fit for you, not just a fit, allegedly? And then how do we call that together? Or how do I make sure that you have some way to call, a way to get there on the bus? Can I give you a bus ticket or a light rail pass, so that you're not just out there on your own trying to access, you have a homework list now.
And that's beautiful. And as you're walking that line, going back to what you said earlier,
not
we're
a case manager. Totally,
Right? So you're
so how do you do that?
So you're flirting that line. You're acting a little bit like a case manager,
Yeah.
but needing to remind them that you're not.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. And it's hard to do. I mean, we have the privilege here at Central, myself and my colleague who does this work as well, that we can spend a good amount of time with someone, right? We can sit down and say, okay, you're telling me that you want to go to detox, but you've tried X, Y, and Z before and it hasn't worked. Let's talk about why, so I can try to find some place that doesn't share those characters. That can be a long conversation, and it should be a long conversation because it's really important. And I have the privilege in my schedule to do that because this is my work. But branch staff don't have that, right? They're on the desk, they're helping somebody with computer help, they're doing this and that and the other. And so again, that's why it's really important for us, and why one of our goals as a team is to curate information, not just for patrons, but for staff too, so that they can do as much of that relational work and save time on the administrative work of finding those resources and connecting to them.
Yeah.
You know, we are a small team and we're trying to do a lot of different things. We want to be available to people. That's our goal, right? Our goal is to be here for folks who, for whatever reason, haven't been able to get the help that they deserve from somewhere else. And if the library is able to be that place where you can get that help, great. And I think that's, again, one of the powerful things about social work in this setting is you can walk into the DSHS office and there might be some stigma attached to that, right? Because that is a place that has a legacy, a history, a lot of societal, burdens. But you can walk into the library and nobody knows what you're doing here, right? And it is a place where, it's generally like pretty beloved. And so walking in here and getting help might carry less weight than it is to go to DSHS.
I love that you're announcing that. I had a very similar experience with when I first started this, the people walking into my architect's office.
Yes.
They weren't walking in to a place that had a sign out that says, you're broken.
Totally.
Come in here.
You're here because you need help.
Yeah. But they were walking into a professional office.
Yeah, you can be here for any reason. And again, we're not judging that reason. We're here for whatever that need is. And
you're walking in those doors, the first assumption is you're going in to get a book.
That's great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. So I come into the library, I'm having a mental health breakdown episode. I come to you and I say, I need help. Give me an example of what you say to me.
Yeah. My first instinct is always to try to thank someone and recognize that and just thank them for telling me that, because it takes a lot. Again, going back to, if you've been through this again and again and you've asked for help and the help hasn't ever been delivered, it's a huge act of trust and vulnerability and courage to say that again to someone else, and also someone who's new to you, right? I mean, some folks we have great ongoing relationships with. A lot of people, I see them one day and I never see them again, right? And so it is, you're saying that to a stranger, somebody that you don't know how it's going to be met. So to recognize that. And
that's beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, that's I have a little cartoon at my desk that one of my old colleagues at a different job gave me, and it's somebody like hanging off the side of a cliff, and it says, how I've always had a hard time asking for help. And so I am that person. I have a hard time asking for help in my personal life. And so when someone is willing to come and ask me for help, I'm like, you're braver than I am. Let's go, Yeah. So yes, so I that is always my first instinct. And then to really explore with them,
do you go find a quiet spot in the library, or do they?
Such a good question. Yeah, if we can. That is one of the challenging things about practicing our work in this setting, is that there aren't a ton of private places. Again, by design, this is a public building. So we try to do it as privately as we can. And again, that's something that I would explore with the patron to say, like, are you comfortable talking about that here? Do you want to find a different area? Is there a place in the library where you're most comfortable, so that we can have the conversation sort of as much on your terms as possible? But there are not hugely, we don't have a private office or anything like that we're working with folks in. We're out on the public floor.
But just the fact that you're aware and respectful of their need for privacy and being comfortable.
Yeah, which privacy is at such a premium. When you are living outside, you're living in the public eye, and that comes with a lot of stress, and so to try to give people as much privacy as possible, and to say that, like, your business deserves privacy. I can't give you total privacy, but I'll give you what I can. And then to talk with them about what it is that they want to accomplish, or, what is it that you're saying that you're in this crisis? What do you think would help you get out of that crisis? What is it that you're looking for? And then to, again, talk about what it is that I can do within that realm, what it is that's kind of beyond
it. Crafting it based on their needs.
Yeah. And we always try to have a conversation with folks about, like, what have you already tried? Because, again, I don't want to give somebody a long list of resources that they're like, yeah, I called all those yesterday and there's nothing, right? But instead, I want to be thinking, okay, what have you tried? What didn't work? Why didn't it work for you? What was it that where were those gaps? And then are there things that I am aware of or that I can connect you to that might fill those gaps that you haven't tried before? And then if that doesn't work, come back and we'll try something else,
Yeah. Okay, so I'm 18. I walk in the doors. I come straight to you and I say, I'm addicted to fentanyl. I want to get off of this. What do I do?
Yeah. So I would ask you to explain a little bit about, I guess, what would an ideal resolution look like? What is your next step? Do you have an idea of what your next step is? And then what is it that feels hard about taking that next step? And then we'd explore together, sort of based on what you are identifying as hard, what might we do together in this brief time that we're working together to overcome that hard step, and figure out a way to move a little bit closer. Maybe we can't get all the way. And that's another part of the conversation, is like, what can we do today? And then what can we, set you up to be doing in the future as well?
I don't mean to throw a bunch of hardball questions at you, but how do you, so let's say both of these examples of mental health and drug use, substance use disorder. And they basically come to you and they say, no, I want to go to detox, I want to go to treatment, or I need a therapist, I need to go see a psychologist. One of the frustrations for anybody that jumps in to help somebody, right? It could be anybody, a citizen that just happens to meet someone that's struggling on the streets, and they have a kind heart and they want to do something. So they start, and so they get on their phone and they start calling. And they quickly hit that brick wall. Because we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough detox beds. We don't have enough therapists, psychologists. How do you navigate that?
My first instinct is to pull on the relational threads that hopefully we have built in that area. So for instance, we have a good relationship with the Harborview office-based opioid treatment team, OBOT, and they have come to some of our events here, our coffee date that we have on Wednesday mornings here. Their peer navigators, peer counselors just come and hang out and like mix and mingle with folks. And so if somebody came and they were like, I am struggling with opioid use disorder and I want to take my next step, I'm not a drug counselor. I'm not an expert in that area. I'm a generalist. I know a little bit about a lot of different things. And so my goal is to connect you to that person who's really good at that and that expert. So rather than calling like a general office number, I would be like, ding, 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 who in my Rolodex can I call that I have a connection to, that I've built a relationship between the library and their organization. So I would call the OBOT team, or I would call... I'm forgetting, out of Pierre, Washington, they have a team of like drug counselors who can come out on site and talk to somebody and then transport them to detox if they're able to get them a bed. So I would call them. And so again, that's part of our work, is to try to build those relationships, to say, okay,
back to community.
And to think about, okay, we're getting a lot of questions about detox, or we're getting a lot of questions about mental health counseling. Who out there is doing a great job with that? And how do I learn from them how to best connect my patrons who might need that to them in that moment of their need?
Yeah, that's great. I love that it's based in relationship, right? That's just, it always comes back to that. What are the relationships that the Seattle Public Library has in the community? Providing these services.
And how are we doing that? Like, how is it not transactional, right? So I'm not just sending somebody or calling on you as the that resource, but what is it that we can do to you to support your work, right? So for the OBOT team, they're like, yeah, we'd love to just have a place where we could meet community or like be out there. So great, we have that. So again, what is it that we can do? What's our lane? What's our piece of the pie? It's going to take all of us to address any of this. And so what is our little piece that we can do? And then how do we uplift the work of the other folks that are, our partners in this? And then the last thing that I will say is the other thing that I always strive to do is be honest with people. So when there isn't a resource, or when I'm like, I've called everybody that I know and I don't have an answer for you, to just say that, and to not be like, well, here's a number that gets you out of my, bucket of
further down
things
the line.
to do,
Yeah.
but kicks you down the curb. Instead, to be like, I've really exhausted the resources that I know of. I'm happy to keep thinking about it and keep trying. But for right now, what are you going to do? You said that you want to get into detox. I can't get you into detox right now. What are you going to do to, bolster yourself in this mindset that you're in right now to tide you over until tomorrow, where we can have this conversation again, or we can call those numbers again. We can try again. What are you going to do in this time period? Or I can't find you a shelter bed tonight. What are you going to do? What did you do last night? How did you get through last night? And can you do that again tonight?
So you become a brainstorming partner.
Right. And I'm like, you have the answer within yourself, probably, of like, how were you resilient the last time you were in trouble? How do we? The issue, of course, with being on the survival line is your field of vision narrows to almost, the answer might be right here, but your field of vision doesn't even, and that's why brainstorming with someone that cares is so important, because you hear a little bit about it, you can say, well, have you thought about this? You talked about your sister. Could you call her?
But that becomes difficult if your brain is racing and you're...
Totally. Well, and just to give people, I think oftentimes my job is like validating bad news, right? And this happens with staff and patrons, where I'm like, yeah, you're right. It sucks. It sucks that there's not a resource. You deserve a resource and there's not one for you. And I'm sorry about that, and to just like validate for people that it's not something that you haven't tried. It's not something that you haven't done. You just didn't think of something.
Failing.
It's not because you're failing, and staff need to hear that too, because again, this is not, as you said, social service information. It's changing all the time. One day a website works, the next day it's gone. Today there's beds, tomorrow there's not. This person that you called and had a great conversation with and felt was in partnership last week is on to a different job. And so oftentimes staff are like, I thought I could be on top of this. I am very good at finding information and getting people information. That's the library's whole job. But this area of information is really different and for some reason, so tricky and so hard and such a quagmire. And so to just validate for staff, like, hey, when you can't find someone a shelter bed, it's not because you didn't look hard enough. It's because there's not enough shelter beds.
Yeah.
And they're really hard to get into. And you can't get anybody into shelter after like 5 p.m. pretty much.
System, basically, the system is broke. It's not you.
Totally, exactly. And to just hear that, it's like, it's not consolation. It's like 2% you can feel better, right?
Yeah.
Just because you're like, okay,
Doesn't
at least
take
I
care
tried.
of the problem.
It doesn't solve the problem, but it at least makes us colleagues in that problem, right? Like now we are on the same team of identifying that is the problem and what are we going to do to fix that problem, not the problem that we think it is, which is not true,
Exactly. What would you tell other organizations and quite frankly, anybody that's housed about what you've learned working at the Seattle Public Library, interfacing with people that are, struggling without basic needs being met? What are some of the things that you would just highlight that are important?
Yeah, this is my job. I come here every day and do this, and I'm still astounded daily at just how complicated things really are and how the view that you might have when you look at something initially is probably wrong, and it is like, so it's not giving the complexity of people's real life situations the attention or the merit that it deserves, right? You might see somebody and be like, why don't they go to a shelter, right? And then if you dig a little bit deeper, it's because, maybe there's not a shelter that's available, or maybe that person has an animal with them that they love and they can't take that animal into shelter with them. So you're asking them to choose between being sheltered and being with their companion,
Or bed bugs, or intimidation, or claustrophobia.
Totally, or they can't, or their gender identity isn't validated by any of the shelter options that we have, or they can't be in their mixed gender couple. There's no couples options there's very few couples options in the city, right? And so just to anytime you find yourself thinking an easy answer to a question, to pause and be like, I bet it's more complicated than I'm giving it credit for. And to just become curious about what are those complexities, right? What is it that would make somebody not accept shelter if it were offered to them? And then how does that then point you towards actions that we could be doing as a society, as an institution, as a city, as a government, whatever it is, an organization, as a neighbor? What could we be doing differently to make options that are more reflective of what people are actually facing and the complexities of their life and the nuances of their needs, so that we can collectively do what it is that we want to do, which is care for each other better, right? I want to believe that. I really do. So to just be curious and doubtful of like easy answers, I think is like the one thing that we can all do, right? And I count myself among them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. As you were talking, I was thinking to myself, damn, the Seattle Public Library is lucky to have you. I really mean that. That's a really beautiful thing that you just shared.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
What would you say to all the people that are struggling unsheltered, that are coming? What would you, if you could hold every one of them and say something to them, what would you say to them?
That you matter, that you matter, and like that you belong here at the library, just like everyone else in this city, that we want to hear from you, that we want to learn from you, that we want to learn together with you, and to just, I guess, not take the worst treatment that you have been dealt as representative of what this city feels about you, and to hopefully hold on to that belief that there are people out there, people who are your neighbors, people who are in positions like mine, people who are in organizations who really do care and are trying to do things in response to the requests that you're making of us or asking us for, but that we need your help to guide us and correct us when we do things that are stupid or not, helpful, but that your voice really, that your voice really matters in that, and that, this is, at least I can speak for my work, this is a place where that feedback and that perspective is really welcome. And we want to continue to strive to change what we're doing, to be better, to be more thoughtful, to be more responsive to what folks are asking from us and from this institution.
Yeah. What are some of the beautiful moments interfacing with people that are outside that you've experienced that keep you charged to be doing this work?
Some of my favorite moments. So there's a program at the library, which is also at other libraries across the country, called Coffee and Conversations. And our colleagues at the Ballard Library were the ones who first started it here at SPL. And it's an opportunity for just what it says, coffee and conversation. So come by, drop in, have a cup of coffee, meet people, talk. Sometimes we have like a conversation topic, and sometimes we just go free form. Sometimes people talk, and sometimes people just get their coffee and leave, and that's totally cool too. But some of my favorite moments are watching patrons make connections with each other or make connections with staff, because staff often they're in a position where like we are asked a specific question by patrons, right? And maybe we chit chat a little bit, but we don't often get to just be like person to person. Like I'm not in my role, wearing my badge at this moment. But like we're just people having a cup of coffee.
Yeah, there's not an agenda.
Not an agenda, right? Exactly. You're not here for a specific question. I'm not trying to dispense information. And so I love watching that happen. And then I love watching patrons connect, right? Somebody who maybe just sits down next to somebody else and then they strike up a conversation. And just thinking about how the library, on our best days, that's what we do really well, right? Is like be that connector between people and ideas, between people and people, between organizations, community, and seeing that play out, and just seeing then like those patrons playing chess together later on the 5th floor, or whatever it is, like that's huge, right? To just be like, oh man, like somebody had a little bit more joy, a little bit more connection, somebody maybe felt less alone.
Yeah, those are building block moments for healthy community.
Absolutely.
That's it. That's in real time watching it being built.
Yeah.
One thing that I think also that's easy to miss in so many parts of our lives is to overlook how important something is to another person. And I do think that most people that are housed don't understand how very important the library is to the unhoused.
Yeah.
Like it is a lifeline. And I'll tell a quick story. There was a really beautiful man that had a number of mental health issues, but also extremely smart, extremely charming. His name was Wes Green. He's passed, died of a fentanyl overdose. But he always had a book, and he was always wanting to say, "Oh, have you read this? Oh my God!"
Yeah.
But he must have created some situation in the Ballard Library.
Oh.
And he got banned.
Yeah.
And he was banned for about a month. And, he would come to my office, and he was so distraught.
Yeah.
And this isn't any kind of negative to the library. I know that a line was crossed, and they did what they needed to do. But it was so devastating for him. I mean, he went into depression about it. Because the library, and I think in a way, is home. Yeah. For a lot of folks that are outside.
Yeah. No, I feel that so deeply, and we as the library in general, it is the worst thing we have to do is when we have to ban someone or exclude someone for behavior, because we have to respect those lines that are uncrossable, right? And there have to be rules
and consequences.
But there have to be consequences. But it is awful to deprive somebody of this resource, right? And all of what this means to people. Many times things that we don't even know, we can't fathom what it means to someone, right? We don't know all of the ways that it might improve their life or, give them access to connection. And so it is awful, and it's not something that we take lightly. And I would say I struggle with it. And I struggle with how do we balance that responsibility well, especially when we know there are not that many other places that a lot of folks can go and experience what they can experience.
I gotta believe
here.
It's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I know somebody that was working at the library also at the time in Ballard, and she struggled with that too.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I'm like, how do we get upstream of that so that our expectations for behavior are clear enough that we never have to get there, right? Yeah. And how do we then build relationships with people so that I can understand oh, you're creeping close to that line. How do I help in a way that is respectful to you and reflective of who you are as an individual? How do I help de-escalate that or get in?
Allows you to pivot.
Yeah, totally. So that we can avoid that, right? And that we can all kind of, we don't have to get to that point.
What haven't we talked about that you want to share about Seattle Public Library?
Oh, gosh. That's a good question. I guess one thing I was what am I going to say if Rex asks me, what can people do? What can people in the community do to, support the library or get involved in this kind of work? And so I think one thing that I would say is come and visit us, regardless of whether you're housed or unhoused, whatever your situation is. Come and visit us and talk to staff about what it is that you're curious about, and help us make this place more reflective of our community. We really want to hear from folks, and we really welcome that participation. It's an organization that really works on participation by the community. So do that and come. And if you're curious about our work, get in touch. We'd love to talk to you. If you work at an organization,
so there are a lot of volunteers that volunteer at the library, or
there are a few established ways to volunteer at the library, like homework help is one. We also have an adult tutoring program, so there are a few ways like that. But then I'd love to just talk with folks about other things that they have in mind, or we're always open to I'd like to hear this author, or I have an idea for a program. So
basically engage.
Yeah, engage. This place works best if we're all sort of chipping in what our unique perspective is, right? On behalf of the community as a whole.
After finishing the interview with Laura and thanking her for the very informative discussion, I spent a couple of additional hours in the library trying to take in the culture being created there. I sat in a number of different locations, watching and listening to people, which included taking part in several conversations. The community hub feeling that Laura spoke of was beautifully happening. I met Anna. She was about my age, originally from California, now living in one of the women's shelters here in Seattle. She told me how she had lived her life not doing what she wanted to do, that she was trying now to find out what that was. She said with a broken smile, "I'm on an adventure to figure out who I am." She then told me she loved the library, that everyone was friendly to her, even the security guards. I met Kevin and his dog Baby Boy outside by the entrance. When I asked him what his thoughts were about the library, he said, "This library is a godsend for me. No other place allows me to feel this welcome, especially since I have a dog." When saying goodbye to Kevin, a woman that I had seen earlier inside, walking around in socks with no shoes, walked past me and sat on the ground. She had been told to leave for not having shoes on. I walked up and offered her some socks that I carry in my backpack. She asked, "Why are you offering me socks?" I said, "Well, I noticed you didn't have any shoes on," to which she replied, "But you're not offering me shoes?" Before I could answer, she said, "Sit down. Let's talk about it." You Know Me Now is a project under the nonprofit Facing Homelessness. It is produced, written, and edited by Tomas Bernatsky and me, Rex Holbein. Please join us on our very active Facebook pages, Facing Homelessness and You Know Me Now, where you can join in on the conversation. A heartfelt thank you to Laura for sharing so openly with us, and to all of you for listening.